Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of Afterbirth plus Lua modding tutorials, and in this video I'm gonna show you how we can alter tear effects. And tear effects in this game are basically everything that already exists in the game, so things like penetrative shots, spectral tears, my tiny planet tears, etc. And basically all of these effects are already implemented in the game, which means you don't really have to code them yourself. The only thing you have to do is change some flags around and just basically enable some things. So let me show you how to do that. So first of all, let's create our item like we did in all of the previous videos. And then of course we go in our content items.xml, and here is where the goodies lie. So first of all, basically you see that everything is very similar, and if you go back to my how to alter stats and how to add flying video, then you'll see that this cache parameter is here. But essentially what this cache parameter does, we're telling the game that this particular item is gonna change some stats. So for example, if we wanted to change damage, what we would put here is cache is damage, which would mean that whenever we pick up this item, we are indicating that we are wanting to change damage. In this case, if we want to make alteration to tear effects, what we would put is a parameter called tear flag. So we would write cache is tear flag, and that's exactly what I did. Okay, now that we basically told the game that this item alters the tear flag, what we have to do in our code is actually check if that flag is enabled and then add our effects. So essentially XML is telling the game that we are altering tear effects, and now in the code we are saying which effects we are adding. So how does the code look like? Basically, again, we just register the mod, we get the item, then it's my function. I'm going to explain what it does in just a second. But first of all, what's important is that we have this function called cache update with two parameters. The first parameter is called player, which means which player is actually calling this function. And the second one is our cache flag. And the cache flag is essentially which stat change is occurring. So in this case, whenever we say, or when we add the callback called mcEvaluateCache and we tie it to this particular cache update function, whenever a cache update happens, this function is going to be called with the appropriate cache flag. So that means that when we pick up this item, the cache flag is going to be tear flag, which indicates that we are changing some tear effects. So in this case, when we do that and actually write out this callback and this function is called, so when we actually pick up our item, you can imagine that the player here would just be us and the cache flag would be tear flag. And that's exactly what we check in the code as well. First of all, we check if the character or if our player even has this item. And if he does have this item, then we check if the cache flag is equals to cache tear flag. And the cache tear flag is, of course, the flag that indicates that we are changing some effects. And how to actually access or alter these tear effects, we actually do that by saying player.tearFlags and then adding the flags on top of that. But I need to explain you how these tear flags work essentially. So first of all, I want to show you this chart, which indicates this is something that I've made and I've pulled off from an online resource, and I'm just going to show you how that actually looked like. And you can see that there's a lot of tear flags here, and you have polyphemus, parasite, cold freezing, etc. But we have all of these weird numbers here, which maybe if you don't know anything about bitwise operators, you're kind of confused. But essentially what happens, if I'm just going to write it out, if you just say player.tearflags is 12, that goes to binary. And if you look at this number, the 12 number in the binary sequence, you can see that that is actually 1100. And if you go to our tear flags, you can imagine that the first digit here, so from the right, is flag no effect, the second digit is flag spectral, the third digit is flag piercing, the fourth digit is flag homing. And depending if that particular digit is 0 or 1, if it's 1, that means that this particular flag is enabled, or if it's 0, that means it's disabled. So if you have this number, for example, that would mean that flag no effect and flag spectral are disabled, but we are enabling the flag piercing and flag homing, and of course all of the rest are disabled. But essentially in this case we're saying that we want to enable flag piercing or flag homing, which means that if you wanted to do that, we would just apply that number and say player.tearflags is equal to 12, because obviously Lua doesn't know how to do binary. But of course that's a bit much to swallow, and if you don't want to worry about it, what I did is I actually created my own chart with a bit easier numbers to understand. So they're just indexed from 0 to 56, and depending on which one you want, you just call this function that I called or made. So what this function does, it takes two parameters. First of all is the current tear flags, because we don't want to overwrite or delete any of them accidentally. And the first parameter is actually which flags are we enabling. So we create a new array by putting curly brackets, and in the curly brackets we're putting which flags we want to enable. So in this case what we want to enable is 1, 2, 3. So if you go check what that is flag spectral, flag piercing, and flag homing. So we're enabling spectral tears, piercing tears, and homing tears. And of course, I'll upload this function, put it in the description, and when that actually happens, we get the appropriate number back, and we just assign it to the player.tearflags. There's no way to disable them, at least not with this code. You would have to do this manually, but for the time being, this is just about adding sets, and if you want to maybe disable them, you'll have to figure it out a bit yourself. I'm leaving you the mystery on how to do that. So now that we actually saw this in practice, let's go into the game. I'm going to show you how this actually works. Now that we're in the game, you can see that we don't have the item yet, so let's give ourselves that first. We just do that by saying give item C501, and you can see that the text is changed to 7, and that indicates which tear flags are enabled on Isaac. So 7 essentially means that flags 1, 2, and 3 are enabled, which should correspond to spectral shots, penetrative shots, and homing shots. So let's test this out. First of all, let's just spawn a few rocks on the ground, and let's just repeat it 5 times so there's more rocks to work with. And you can see that the rocks, well, the tears go over them, so this works as expected. And the next thing we have to do, of course, is spawn a few hoppers just to see if we have penetrative shots. So I just spawn like 4 of them, and indeed we do have penetrative shots, and as well as homing shots. So you can see that this actually works, which is, well, quite surprising in some ways, but not really in other ways, because obviously I tested this before. But I hope you can see that adding these tear effects is not that difficult. And what's really great about it, you don't really have to code this interaction yourselves, like maybe you thought before you did. And it's kind of poorly documented. I found this off of a subreddit post, and I'll link you to that as well in the description, because I think it explains some things that maybe I didn't. But overall, this is how you add the tear effects in the game, and I hope you see the value in that. So now that we're at the end of this video, I actually want to say that I wanted to include this particular parameter in my original stats video on how to fly, because obviously it's somewhat closely related, because we're changing the stats through the cache update function. But at the time I didn't really know how to or what the tear flags represent, but ever since, people have come together to actually create some really nice charts and actually explain these things really well. So I just actually thought to make another video to actually pass that knowledge forward. And in this case, a lot of these things that I've actually made in my videos, at least in the first 3 or 4 videos, weren't just my original findings. They usually were me experimenting combined with something I've learned from other mods. So that's why I actually try to reference them. And this time also, I'm going to give you a subreddit thread where I actually learned how to add tear effects, and I think he explains it really well. It's much more condensed, so if you don't have the time to actually watch this video, even though you're at the end, so that means you probably watched it, nevertheless, if you just click on that link, you actually have some more explanation in text form. So maybe if you're more of a reader than actually a watcher, you can read that one, and it's gonna give you some tips on how to do the same thing I actually talked about here as well. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time.